Mr. Mayor, we are on YouTube. Mayor, I think you're on mute.
Thank you kindly. I'd like to call this special meeting of City Council to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Del Chapo.
Here.
Councilmember Shealy. Councilmember
I'm
Saxon.
here, sorry.
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell.
Yeah.
Councilmember Brady.
Present.
Councilmember Gregory.
Here.
Councilmember Waring. Councilmember Seekings.
Here.
Councilmember Shade.
Present.
Councilmember Griffin.
Here.
Councilmember Appel.
Here.
Councilmember Jackson. Here. Mayor Tecklenburg.
Here. And now, if y'all would like to join, Councilmember Saccharin, would you please lead us in an invocation and pledge of allegiance?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. Dear Lord, I pray that you guide us always, satisfy the needs that need to be met during this meeting, strengthen us as we make tough decisions. I pray that we will be like well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. I pray that we will be fruitful. Father, please guide us so that at this meeting we can be productive. Let us be effective and decisive. Amen.
Amen. So the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'll please join me. We have a flag over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag.
The flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you kindly. So first we have a committee report, our Committee on Ways and Means, Councilmember Gregory.
I move for approval. And
You have a second to accept the results of our Ways and Means Committee. Any further comments or questions? All in favor, please say aye.
aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Next up, we have 4 bills.
Move for approval.
Second.
We got a motion to approve and second. All
Apologize for the interruption, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm
Steve Romelin and Heather Malloy worked diligently on these. We presented them to you at our last meeting, and we got first reading on them. And Steve or Heather, do y'all have anything to add since our last meeting? Could I just ask for that? And thank you, Heather. I hope you're feeling better.
I am. Thank you so much, Mayor. I would just like to say the legal team worked diligently over the past several months to put these together and put them in front of you. We do know we had many First Amendment activities that came through our city within the last year, and we wanted to make clarifications and present a better process, improved process, I should say, for these First Amendment demonstrations. Thank you
very much. Heather did a lot of research on this. Any discussion? Councilmember Jackson.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Heather and Steve. I know how much, I don't know in terms of actual minutes and hours, but I know from speaking with Steve and some of the other officers that, this had a lot of consultation, and you all, really did an inordinate job.
the mayor himself admitted he wasn't
to make
aware of
these changes to the laws that are going to be clarifying to the public and the users of these First Amendment rights opportunities for all of our citizens and visitors to our city. So I'm very appreciative of that. I do think, Mayor, that we've heard from citizens who, I think have demonstrated that they have a dedication to following along with especially the opportunity for First Amendment statements to be heard in public over the last few years. And I was hoping that maybe you could just give us a little rundown about some of the citizen comments that you specifically addressed face to face the other day. I know that one of the concerns was that we were publishing versions of these ordinances that didn't explain the changes that we actually made as we annotated them. So I tried to send that out, but it was at the last minute this afternoon, because we clearly got copies of the amendments that we gave first reading approval to on the 20th that were annotated with the typical way that ordinance amendments are done. So the original text is in not bold, correct? And if there's anything removed, it's bolded and crossed out. And then if there's anything new, it's bold text. And that's the way the documents came to us. So I think that's one thing that maybe we should clarify. We're not trying to do a bait and switch and change laws out from old to new. We're amending existing laws. The one new one was to make a definition of First Amendment rights and opportunities, as well as separate out what we've always just called the parade permit, from my understanding, that has devolved into sort of a mushy definition, so that now we have a parade ordinance, permit ordinance, that will be handled by the special events and Department of Recreations, which is the much more appropriate place for those staffing to be done. But Mayor, you said to me a little while ago that we've always had inherent in these ordinances the opportunity for regulating and enforcing the fact that officers have the right for their orders to be obeyed. So could you just speak to that for a minute? And I think the other one was, I think those are the two things that I heard the most from citizens who thought that we were making these laws less constitutional as opposed to more, which I do agree that they're more clear, that they're more specific in making sure that we are practicing the protection of First Amendment rights.
Well, thank you. This has been a journey of improving, in my view, and clarifying a number of ordinances that the city had. And yes, renaming things that were more appropriate. We had an ordinance called parade permits that were issued through our police department that, for the most part, weren't anything about having parades. I mean, when we have our Martin Luther King parade and our Emancipation Day parade and our St. Patrick's Day parade, none of them needed to get a parade permit. They needed a special events permit. So some of it was just going back over ordinances that might have been formed 20 and 30 years and naming them appropriately. And so recognizing, importantly, so it may have content from the former parade permit, but recognizing formally the rights of our citizens to express themselves. And that's why we named this new ordinance the First Amendment Demonstration Ordinance. And it makes those things clear, I believe. And some aspects may have shifted from one thing to another, like to really apply for your St. Patrick's Day parade, you should go to the special events application and ordinance to control that. And then there were a couple of things that were, reach over everything, and that is addressing the new open carry gun state legislation. So, and Heather spent a heck of a lot of time more on this in the weeds than I did. So Heather, help me out here if I'm not explaining all this very well.
Mayor, can I make one suggestion? I think one of the other questions was about, we removed a reference to flags as weapons, which that's just in a different place.
So that got moved to the weapons ordinance, and it applies. I think no matter what happens in the city, you don't, whether you have a permit or not, you're not supposed to use a flagpole as a weapon. So that got covered in the new weapons ordinance. It may not be in the demonstration ordinance, but it's in the weapons ordinance, and that's covered. As to your question about having obeying a lawful order, I think that's that's a legal matter. That's a law. You must obey a lawful order of law enforcement. And I'm going to ask Steve or Heather again to comment on that.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. So the legal team in developing these new ordinances or amendments to ordinances really went back to the drawing board and looked at our basic constitutional principles of protecting citizens' First Amendment rights to free speech and free demonstration activity. And so we wanted to define that so that it was clear for people and they knew what issues applied or which parts of the ordinances applied to demonstrations. And we titled them differently to, as the mayor said, to decrease the confusion using terms like parades, et cetera. So now they're First Amendment activities and there's a lot of clarity. So we know that the protection of First Amendment rights is seminal to all citizens. And we also know that restrictions on time, place, and manner are permitted pursuant to constitutional law. And those can be placed on First Amendment activity if they are reasonable and if there are justifications. So that is something that can be done now. So for instance, when a police officer gives an order or maybe limit some of the activity, some of those things could be falling under time, place, and manner restrictions. So it's really important that those orders are followed. And so these apply to whether, regardless of you having a permit or not, they apply to First Amendment demonstration activities. So we really went back to the drawing board so that we could make that clear and make those applications apply, because you want to be able to keep citizens safe when they are engaging in these demonstrations. You also want to have ingress and egress to certain areas. And you also don't want to have obstruction of roadways or sidewalks, et cetera. So all of that was taken into consideration when we put this together. And additionally, I wanted to mention that part of this entire plan for the legal team was to, in addition to the ordinances and making changes for clarity, we are putting together some frequently asked questions. And we will be putting those on the website for the public. We are finishing those up so that if people have questions about a special events permit, a First Amendment permit, et cetera, they can go to the website. We will also be putting links to the new ordinances on the website. And I know that the Charleston Police Department is working right now to put something on their website very soon so that individuals know what the rules are and where they can go. And additionally, they will be putting their permit application online too, because there will be some changes made to that. So there is a lot more in the works to improve this process.
And then I'll share, as we discussed before, there's really three buckets. The third bucket is if you have a private event and want to rent some space at one of our parks, that's also possible. That's not a special event. It's not a demonstration. So you can apply, like to have a wedding at the gazebo down at White Point Gardens or at Hampton Park, and you do that through the Parks Department application. And again, that will be part, Heather, will it not, of our frequently asked questions to explain that option as well. Great. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to remind my colleagues on the process that we've gone through with this. We had a joint meeting with public safety and recreation on the 19th to go over these proposed ordinances. We had a very good discussion and presentation from the legal staff and from the police department as to the purpose and need for having this done, particularly to have it done before August 15th. Then our report to full council was made at our July 20th meeting, which gave the citizens an opportunity to comment on these ordinances as they were going forward. And I want that to be heard very loudly and clearly, because some of the comments I've seen online and even a phone call I got just before council started was that we were depriving people of an opportunity to weigh in on this. But you had the opportunity to weigh on this back on July the 20th. And the other point that I think that has been batted around, as Heather's talked about and the mayor's talked about and Steve has talked about, as to providing clarity on this process is really important. One of the things that this ordinance does add, in addition to the clarity part of it, is that if you feel like you have been denied a permit, you've got an appeal process is outlined as well on this. And the other distinction I just want to make to the public and to my colleagues is this point. There is a difference between assembling, which we are not restricting if you are assembling spontaneously or if the number of folks is less than 25. That has not changed in any point at all. There's certain rules and laws have been passed about that, and court decisions have been issued concerning the size of those assembling. But what is important to make a distinction upon is assembling and then marching or parading. And as Heather has pointed out, with that, we have the ability to manage the controls of the wheres and whens and hows of those taking place. So the spontaneous or the size of the crowd to assemble does not necessarily give the right to march. Because the police have and the citizens have a responsibility making sure of public safety, not just for those who wish to march or parade, but also to other citizens who are not participating in that march or parade. So these are very important distinctions that I think we all need to take into consideration. And I certainly would urge us to pass, give second and third reading approval on these various ordinances. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
You're coming across a little.
Councilmember Griffin, your audio's off. I can't hear you.
Councilmember Griffin, let me go to Councilmember Jackson, who has her hand up.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, that's better. Yes, sir.
You can hear me now?
Now we can. Yes, sir.
Hey, sorry, I'm traveling today and I'm having to do this virtually. Anyway, I just wanted to reiterate the point that I made earlier in our Ways and Means Committee, that I feel like there's something that I don't understand about why we're having a city council meeting, a meeting of our entire body, and we don't have a citizen participation period. I'd like to get a clarification on that. I understand that this is considered an emergency meeting, but to Councilmember Shade's point, yes, people had an opportunity to speak at our last city council meeting, which was last week. But whenever we vote and take up an issue for a first reading and a second reading and a third reading, that gives the public at least two public opportunities to speak to the city council before the vote's taken. Whereas in this case, that wasn't the case. Now, I'm not saying whether or not I agree or disagree. I voted yes on these ordinances the first time around. And to be honest with you, I would probably vote yes again on this one. However, I think that we have an obligation as a body to honor the rules of our council. And when we have a city council meeting, there should be a citizen participation period. That shouldn't change. These ordinances were not planned to be brought up today. They happen to be brought up today because of the other issue that we took up earlier today, which was the bond referendum. We should have citizen engagement whenever we put a ordinance and pass a second reading and turn it into a law. there should be an opportunity for citizens to speak up. We're never going to be able to bring people to the table and work on these issues that we have citywide if our citizens feel like we're meeting behind closed doors and getting something passed without them having the opportunity to speak. And so on these 4 ordinances today, I'm going to abstain because I don't feel like we should take any vote where we don't at least have a public engagement if we're meeting as a body, as a city council.
All right, thank you, sir. Council Member Jackson, did you want to be heard again?
I wanted to speak just as we were trying to make sure that, the public was understanding the clarity of the documents in front of us. And maybe we've had an example of that in recent days because a group has applied for a gathering permit, a First Amendment protection gathering permit to be in one location, doesn't automatically give that same group the opportunity to walk and march in places that they have not already been approved to have a marching route. Is that not correct? And I do think we had an example of the difference in the recent days.
Heather?
So I hope I'm addressing your question correctly, and if I'm not, let me know. But when a group applies for a permit for a First Amendment demonstration, and it would also apply if it's kicked over to a special events First Amendment demonstration, that person who applies for the permit specifically gives the information as to what they would like to do. Where do they want to be? What location? They have to write down, do they want to march or do they not want to march? What are the street locations, et cetera? So the person applying has to be specific, and naturally so, because there needs to be an evaluation if there are sufficient resources to support that, to provide safety for the protesters, citizens, do roadways need to be blocked, et cetera. So there's a whole process that's involved when someone applies for such a permit. And then there's an evaluation period to determine whether or not that can be done. Things may pop up, such as someone else may be at that location at the same time. Maybe too many resources would take, or maybe there is a better route. That's where those time, place, and manner considerations come in that are constitutionally supported. A government is permitted to do so. So that's where there's an evaluation process. If there's an alternative route that can be given, if the route that is requested specifically or location, as you said, is not available, then an alternative can be offered and sent back to the permittee, whereby the permittee will agree to the new alternate route. So once the permit is completed, it's very clear as to what the parameters are of the permit. And it's also very clear that if those parameters aren't followed, then there could potentially be a violation. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
All right. Any further questions or comments? Hearing, Councilmember Waring.
It won't be long on this one. Listen, I voted for the first reading, but I do believe that the public should have more input, and this process doesn't allow for it. And I'm not going to vote for it for that reason. I can see the work that's been done, but transparency matters, and the public should have more input, even though we may not like what they say. We have the right. They have the right to be heard, and in this environment, right now, they don't. So I think we should have this at a regular meeting to be voted on. But anyway.
All right, Councilmember Mitchell.
Mr. Mayor, is this just the second reading?
Yes, sir.
Well, if they have some concerns and some of my colleagues have concern, can't we do a second reading and then do the third reading next month? Would that hinder anything at all?
Public hearing on the third reading.
Right.
Mr. Mayor.
Let me call upon Ms. Hardina.
I just want to ask.
beamed up just a moment ago.
Yeah.
I just wanted to remind council that the reason why we wanted it to get second and final reading today was so that it would go into effect before the open carry law went into effect on August 15th. So that was the reasoning behind adding it to the agenda at this time.
Thank you. Councilmember Shade.
I just want to reiterate that point that Susan had made, in that the other part of all of this ordinances that we have discussed was to include the exemptions and that was granted by the open carry law. So some of these ordinances are addressing that open carry law restrictions that we can't have dealing with periods of assemblage. So if we don't pass this today, the open carry law goes into effect on August the 15th. And then these ordinances will not take effect until later. So this is the deadline we're having for this.
So I would just also add, and I welcome our citizens' comments and not afraid of any comment they might make about us or me. And but we do have the ability to amend anything. So we pass this this afternoon, and some citizens' comment leads to another perspective or review that council, at the pleasure of council, y'all would like to amend and change. We always have that right. All right. Any other comments, questions?
Mr. Mayor, I was hoping now that sorry.
Let me call on Councilmember Jackson. He hadn't been heard yet.
Okay.
Councilmember Sacron.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to have to agree with Councilman Griffin and Councilman Waring. So I guess I'm still not clear. Is there a reason we can't just vote on second reading tonight and then bring it back to the next council meeting? I'm hearing a 2-day discrepancy between the open carry and then what we're trying to do. Is that a significant challenge? I guess I still don't understand.
Well, it would just mean that this would not go into effect until after the open carry legislative act goes into effect.
Right. And I think weighing the fact that we do not have the public available for comment, to me, outweighs any advantage that we would have in getting this passed tonight. So I'm going to vote no as well.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Jackson. Oh, and then
thank you. And now that we do have Ms. Herdina here for a few final hours, I was hoping maybe she could address Councilmember Griffin's question. Is it legal for us? Are we within our rights of meeting or way of operating under our rules to not have citizens' comments when we have an official council meeting that involves hearings, second readings? I think we should know that for the future if we don't make any changes for right now.
I don't believe we're required to have citizen participation at a special meeting. However, going forward, if council would like to change the rules to provide for that, we can do that. And I'll certainly defer to any of the other lawyers if they have any other thoughts, or Jennifer.
Yeah, and I don't know if this would be helpful just to add, but typically when we have our special and emergency meetings, and just for clarification, this is not an emergency city council meeting. This is a special meeting. But typically when we have those meetings, we don't have a citizen participation portion on the agenda. The special meetings, and Susan can correct me, but the special meetings are really just for, certain specific items. And we did have a public participation at our previous meeting last week when these were up for first reading. These have not been amended, the ordinances, they have not been amended since then. But anyway, so that's why it was not on there. I don't know if that addresses any of the questions, but that's been our practice in the past, that we've had a citizens participation on every emergency agenda or every special city council agenda.
Councilmember Gregory.
Yeah, Mayor, this is a question for legal. If we don't pass this tonight, wouldn't state law be in effect? And if state law is in effect and our ordinance really tracks it, okay, the law is still in effect and enforceable, regardless of what we do this evening. Am I correct?
Well, I'll defer to Steve or to Heather on this, but I think Councilmember Gregory, what the concern is if this ordinance is not passed, and if there was a gathering, the city would not have any authority, as I understand it, to prevent open carry at one of those demonstrations. And so that's the reason why we were trying to go ahead and codify the law that would basically say at the time that the open carry law went into effect, at that same time, you could not open carry at a city permitted event. But Steve or Heather, I mean, you are more familiar with the act. If you want to jump in and supplement that, please do.
Yeah, I'll just state that the open carry law states that municipalities may restrict the otherwise lawful open carrying of a firearm in public property when we issue a permit. So under our current permitting scheme, we could make that a condition of the permit without the ordinance in place. I think what the ordinance does, though, is it clarifies that and expands it to special events and parks permit situations as well. So I think under our current ordinances, we still could prohibit someone from open carrying at an event that we permit.
Okay. Chief Reynolds, you want to add any perspective to this conversation?
I would just say I appreciate the thoughtfulness of this, the detailed research that went into it. It's been very collaborative. I think it's been very well researched. I think there was a lot of outreach to municipal attorneys around the country, other cities that are similarly struggling with making sure we balance the First Amendment rights of protesters and how to do it safely, how to respect our monuments and allow other citizens to have access to our monuments, i.e. the Battery, some of the other monuments that to be able to share that and do it safely. And the law very clearly gives us the ability to, has been articulated already, to determine time, place, and manner. We need to do that, and we have been doing that. And this is something that'll further that'll help actually those people that are participating in those that want to do it lawfully. Some have chosen not to, but those that want to do it lawfully, that want to apply for a permit, that want to do it safely, this gives them a little bit more information. I think it makes it more palatable for them and for the city. But as been articulated, can we move forward without this? Yes. The law is there for us. It supports us in doing those things that we've been doing, that we've been talking about. I think this ordinance adds a little bit more clarity and has been articulated. It connects into this August 15th date, the idea of open carry. When we made the arrest a few days ago, one of the persons who was involved in assaulting a police officer and spitting on a police officer, and not to get too detailed into that event, that was predictable, it was preventable, it shouldn't have happened, but it did. And one of those individuals had two handguns in his backpack. Some of the individuals in the protests were wearing ballistic vests and helmets and other things. When you look at these types of events around the country, when you look at what happened on May 30th of last year, when you look at some of the language being used, the profanity, the lack of cooperation with the police, there's a need for us to have clarity in these conversations and these events to make sure that everybody, all the participants, the protesters, the police, public safety, our citizens, our businesses are protected and that it's safe. We're going to continue to do that. I've made it clear that we're going to make more arrests for those people who choose to break the law, who choose to assault the police, who choose to be unsafe about their activities. And so I'll just leave it there. Whether this passes or not, we're going to do everything possible to keep our city safe and to protect people's rights and protect the Constitution. And it's not an easy thing to do. So the more that we have these conversations openly, which I feel like we've been doing that, the better. And so people have total clarity about what our expectations are, what the law is, and what we're going to do.
Thank you, sir. All right. Any final comment or question? Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would just say that, by my read, these ordinances are not really major substantive departures from existing practices. It's more about streamlining and making the process clearer and more efficient, and ultimately making the jobs of our brave men and women officers easier. We had a incident this week. We've had multiple incidents over the last year and a half, and I don't think I need to remind anybody on this council about that. If we had a public hearing on this where people could call in on Zoom, we'd probably hear from 7 people. We all know who they are. But let's think about the thousands and thousands of other people we represent that we're called upon to make decisions on behalf of every single day, right? They don't want chaos in the streets. They don't want another May 30th. They don't show up to Zoom calls. They don't show up to city council, but it's our job to represent them today. I think this is going to come off bad. I don't care what these activists have to say about this ordinance. We have a duty and an obligation for this city to keep this city safe. Some of the activity and conduct that we've seen in the streets lately is completely out of line and unacceptable. These people know better. They're doing it for publicity stunts. They're doing it for their Instagram followers. And enough is enough. You're not going to spit on our cops. You're not going to carry around guns at these events. And that's unacceptable. This is what we have to do as a city to keep our citizens, our businesses, and our officers safe. And the 24 people that like to protest every week, they're just going to have to deal with it. Thank you. So I look forward to voting for this tonight. We don't need public hearing to do our job.
Thank you. All right. For second reading, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Abstain.
So I have, just for the record, I have how many names? Councilmember Sacman, was there anyone else?
Jennifer, I was having a little trouble hearing you, actually.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
So I have 1 nay, Councilmember Sacman. Was there anyone else?
Councilmember Griffin, I believe.
Wasn't it?
I abstain, sir.
He abstains.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Shealy, were you trying to speak up?
No, sir, I voted for it.
Okay, thank you. I saw the little light box come on. All right, now for third reading and ratification.
So move. Second.
Motion and a second. Anybody, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Abstain.
Nay, and an abstention from Councilmember Griffin, I believe. All right, well, thank y'all for that good discussion, and we will have a robust citizens participation at our next meeting. And I'll repeat that if there's any part of any of these ordinances that it makes sense to amend and change based on future comments and conversation, we can always do that. So thank y'all for coming together, and this meeting stands adjourned if there's no further